What's going on, guys? If you are watching this, I greatly appreciate you. In today's video, we are taking my 2019 STI right here back to stock. I purchased it lightly modified and I got most of the stock parts with it. And then my 2017 STI I purchased came with the stock downpipe. So I decided it was time to turn this one back to stock so we can use the mods on our 2017. So this 2019 STI is not very heavily modified. I bought it blown up. I put a stock motor back in it. It's got injectors, a fuel pump, a flex fuel kit, a few other things, air oil separator, an intake, a turbo inlet. Those things are pretty simple. So we're going to have to pull the intake manifold, pull the intercooler, pull all that sort of stuff to get all this off. It's not the end of the world. It also has a cob downpipe that we're going to take off of it. And we'll get this back to stock, get the stock tune back on it, clean it up, list it for sale, and we're using some of the mods on my 17 STI. So let's jump right into it. It's going to be mostly probably time-lapsing. I'll voice over some of it for you guys, just talking about what I'm doing. Yeah, pretty boring. Let's get right into it. It's not too often that I get a car that I have all the stock parts to return it back to factory, so it's pretty nice when I do. Here is the cob downpipe off of the 19 STI. And this is the factory downpipe off of the 2017 STI. You can see that the factory one is smaller, and the big difference is a bell mouth downpipe versus the factory downpipe. But we are not going to be tuning this thing once it's all back to stock, and we have to have a stock downpipe on it if we don't want to tune it. That is the reason I'm doing it. I got a new gasket in the center here. I have a new donut gasket for the rear and some new spring bolts. So let's get this downpipe back on here. Turbo looks good, doesn't look wet at all, which means it's not burning oil, which is obviously ideal. This car is actually really nice underneath. So I'm going to clean up the factory downpipe a little bit. It's got some dirt on it. This car was from Texas and I think lived on a dirt road. I'm going to try and wire brush some of it off. Then we're done. Underneath the car, we'll be up to pulling the intake manifold and getting all that stuff sorted out. Downpipes are pretty easy to install. You just have to slide it onto the studs for the turbo and then bolt it to the catback. There was a little bracket I had to bolt onto the transmission. Then we went up top, we bolted it down all the way to the turbo. Then we were on to pulling the intake manifold, which can look pretty intimidating on a Subaru, but once you do it a couple times, it's not too bad. Intake manifold is, of course, off. And all I did, this is the manifold setup from the 2017 STI that I have. All I did was take off the wiring harness and put the 2019 wiring harness on here because we're going to be running factory TGVs, factory injectors, all those things. So then that is going to go back onto this motor. But we need to do a few more things before we do that. We need to figure out the air pump line routing, which I believe I got all the air pump lines with this car when I bought it, but I think the 17 also has it. So once we do that, then we have to pull the oil pressure sensor gauge out, the wiring, the wideband wiring out, because this car is going 100% back to stock. I already have the factory downpipe back on there, good to go in that area. But this motor looks really clean, really nice. Underneath, there's no leaks or anything. We put this one together, I think 4,000 or 5,000 miles ago, so that's good to see that we don't have any leaks. I'm kind of dreading doing this air pump routing because they go to the back of the cylinder heads. I'm not exactly sure how it all mounts up. I don't know, maybe it sneaks through here. I'm not really 100% sure. We'll figure it out here in a sec though. Let me go find the piping and see what we need to do. Here is all the air pump stuff from the 2017 STI. I'm going to make sure that it is the same plugs, same part numbers as the 19 STI stuff. This stuff is all whole and assembled. I think the stuff I got with this car, I think they cut this pipe probably to remove it, which unfortunately might mean that I might need to remove the turbo, possibly. I'm not really sure. Whatever we got to do, we're going to do it. But it's nice to have all this stuff to put back on here. So let's get that done. This piece goes right here. I sort of have the rest laid out how it goes. This goes to the back of that cylinder head. This down here goes to the back of the driver's side cylinder head. These are one of these is like a barometric sensor, and I'm not sure what the other one is. This goes onto the manifold, this goes behind the manifold, and this runs up front to the 2 ports on this guy right here. So it looks like we have everything, which is awesome. Now just to see how easy this all goes in, yeah, I'm not gonna record all of this, but I'll time lapse it and update you guys how it goes. This part was the part I was definitely dreading the most, turning this back to stock, because I did not know how hard it would be to get the piping back where it should be, but it turned out to not be too horrible. All right, we got this portion on. Thankfully, I did not have to remove the turbo or anything like that. I was able to snake it in there. I did have to remove this rubber line right here to get it to sit down in there, but it is crazy how tight it was back there. Almost no room to work with, but we ended up getting it. So that is tightened down. We got it tightened down right here. And I think that's going to be definitely the hard part. We've got one more to do on this side, which is this guy right here, and then we will get the rest hooked up and we should be done there. And that's honestly not as bad as I was expecting. That's kind of the part I was dreading. I thought it was going to be way more difficult, but yeah, going well so far. We should be able to have this thing back together today, hopefully. The gauges are going to be another thing that's a little bit tougher to pull just because I ran them when the motor was out of the car. So it's just a little bit more difficult, but let's keep plugging away. See you after the time lapse again. If you guys are still watching, again, I greatly appreciate you. This helps support me. If you guys want to support me further, hitting the subscribe button and hitting the like button does that for me. Air pump stuff is all on. Again, easier than I expected. What's up, kitty? This went on there nice. Got it bolted down. The little pipe runs along the side, comes up right here to those two, whatever they are, and then that one runs to the passenger side. But yeah, everything's on, ready to go. All the plugs for the wiring harness were left on there, thankfully. Now all we got to do is pull out the oil pressure sensor, get the factory PCV back on there. It had a pair and air oil separator. I'm removing that as well. So get the factory PCV on there, and we'll be getting back to putting the intake manifold on and getting it running. I'm gonna take out these gauges now. Should be pretty straightforward. I've got the original cluster surround from this car, so just unhook the gauges. They should pop right out like this, and then just unhook the wiring down there, pull the wiring out, and then we're done. I will be pulling the access board out too, but I think I'm going to put just like one of the Cobb off the shelf tunes on it just to make sure everything looks good in terms of air, fuel, and everything while we're driving it. Might be a little bit off because the car is completely stock, but it would have a Cobb map on it. But just kind of some peace of mind that everything looks good. And then we'll put the stock tune fully back on it and go from there. But this oil pressure gauge actually sold, so I got to get that shipped out. This other gauge I think I'm going to put in the 17 STI. That's where this cluster surround will be going as well. But I think I got to take off this little panel right here, and I'm going to be blocking it with the camera, so I'll probably just skip past that part. When I wired in these gauges, I made sure to not splice into the factory wiring, so I used a little plug-in that goes into the fuse panel that it gets its power from there, so I don't have to cut anything, and then I just grounded through this nut right here. So it's going to be easy to take out and easy to install in the next car. And then I just put the fuse back. This guy I already unscrewed, so this comes out nice and easy. This is all it is. Factory one goes back in. This goes back up here. Then we pull the wiring out that way through the engine bay because the plugs in here are a lot smaller than the plugs in the engine bay to pass through the rubber grommet that they are in. So let's get this back together. We will be done in here and we can start putting the intake manifold back on. I've got the wiring ran through right there. This grommet right here. We might actually pop the grommet out when we pull this out, which is okay. We'll see how easy this comes out. One connector. The second one is the one that has the fuse connector and all that on it, so this one might be slightly more difficult. I'm trying to do this without cutting that stuff off because I don't want to re-splice it on there, but we might have to. We'll discover here pretty quickly. All right, there's the plug. Here comes all the fuse stuff. We got it. Look at that. I'm going to get it pulled out of this grommet here. We'll get the grommet back in. We're done with the gauges. I was not looking forward to that either, but it honestly wasn't as bad as I was thinking. I feel like a lot of things aren't as bad as I think they are. I just procrastinate and don't do them. I really should be doing them. You got to do the stuff that you don't want to do to get to the stuff that's fun, like starting up new builds and going to drive them. You got to do the work to get there. So, got to work on that. Here's the grommet we got to put back. I think I'm going to go grab the one out of the 17 STI because that one doesn't have any gauges in it, and so we might as well already use the slit one for the one we're going to put gauges in and use the good one for right here. So I'll go grab that and pop it back in. I think we are all done getting the modifications off besides like the oil cap there, some of these Grimspeed caps, which I might just leave on there. we'll see. I don't think we have to take anything else off the block. I'll of course double check. And then we've got this manifold right here that has all the factory parts back on that as well. Yeah, we're getting pretty close, which is good because I was not looking forward to do this. Oh, the one other thing we need, factory fuel lines. This had a flex fuel kit and probably a fuel stumble kit, not 100% sure. So we're gonna have to go steal those off of the 17 STI. If that has a fuel stumble kit by chance, oh well, so be it. We'll put that on here. A few more little boost lines that I have the stock ones, and we're gonna do those as well, and we'll be good to go. And I'll video throwing the intake manifold back on. I'm gonna check, make sure there's nothing down in any of the runners here. Probably about 2 years ago, I was working on a Forester and I had taken the intake off, did some work on it, and went to go put the intake back on. And one of my buddies peeked down in there and I had dropped a hose clamp down in there. That would have not been good. Another thing that I learned, and I always check now. So I'm going to take a look in there, get the intake gaskets on there, and we're good to go to throw it back on. Everything's back to stock. I even have all the stock boost lines, like I said, all the air pump stuff. Everything is back to stock. We've got the stock fuel lines back on from the 2017 STI. I have all the stock caps for it. So this car will pretty much be 100% stock. I'll have to see if there's anything else that is not stock, but that's good. I will disclose that when I sell it that it wasn't stock when I got it, and obviously people will be able to look at this video if they'd like. I'm not trying to say that the car was never modified ever. I just like to be upfront and be that way, so that is how I do things. Okay, we'll see how this goes. I'm not super confident, but let's get all this wiring up out of the way. All right, let's give this a whirl. The biggest thing is this side over here. I already can tell that I think I might need to remove the air conditioning, the AC compressor. I do not think I will be able to get it on there without doing that. All right, let's just move it. It's going to be way easier to move it. I didn't think it would be a problem, but obviously it's a problem. So yeah, let me unbolt this and then we'll throw it on. Now this side can also be very tricky, trying to get the turbo inlet to line up. This is stuff that you just need to take your time on. Make sure everything's out of the way. You're not pinching anything under the intake manifold because you will regret it later. You never want to fight the manifold to sit flush. You want to just make sure it sits down by itself. You don't want to have to shove it down. If you have to shove it down, you are not doing something correctly. Like, see how that doesn't want to sit down? We've got something pinching it right there, so we got to figure it out. Like I said, sometimes you just need to take your time. If you need to pull the intake back off, pull the intake back off. It can be frustrating. Working on cars in general can be frustrating. So maybe expect to get frustrated, but better take your time, spend a little extra time, and do things the correct way than do things the incorrect way and have to do it over again. That is not what we want. So take your time, make sure you're doing it right, especially this turbo inlet because these are a pain. There's one advantage to going to a rotated turbo besides looking awesome. It is not dealing with the turbo inlet that goes under the intake manifold like it does on Subarus. But it looks like we've got it on there. One of the first things that I like to do is get like 2 bolts started, like one on each side here. So again, another thing to do here is make sure your gasket is still on where it should be. That's another mistake I've made. When putting on the intake manifold, the gasket popped off of where it was and I did not notice. And so I continued to put it on and I ended up having an intake leak and I had to pull the intake again after trying to figure it out and discover where the intake leak was. But yeah, just make sure your intake gaskets are still on. These are all kind of more specific to Subaru because Subarus are weird. Take your time, do it the right way the first time. It's going to take longer, but guess what? It's shorter than doing it a second time. Just do it the first time, take your time. Okay, intake is bolted down. Got a big old mess here. Should probably clean up my tools, but I have a bad habit of not cleaning up my tools. Anybody else? And I'm gonna throw the rest on time lapse. Is more boring than this part was, and then hopefully jump to first startup. Now I'll see you after the time lapse. This part was me just plugging in a bunch of sensors, plugging in a bunch of hoses, figuring out where it all goes. And instead of jumping around from side to side trying to figure out where everything goes, I like to start on one side, work my way around the motor, and that's how I make sure I don't miss things. This next clip is my brother trying to figure something out on his BMW. Who knows what's wrong with it?
That was 7K, dude.
7,400
or no, 7,100.
When you hit the limit, it kicked out a little chunk called black.
Okay, I'm missing a few things that I didn't notice. I'm missing this little bracket right here. I'm missing the screws for this, and they're not the same as the Cobb one. And I'm also missing this big intake duct here, which I didn't realize, but I'll just order that. We just got the intercooler and the alternator left to put on.
I need videos, dude. Oh, Subaru, not. She's fixed, bud.
Nice.
Ripper.
Even with the few parts that we are missing, I'm going to try and find some screws so we can get this bolted down. We're going to plug that in and make sure everything runs good, make sure we can get the access port unmarried, and then we'll have these parts on the way so we can actually drive it, make sure all is good there. But we're pretty much done. Everything went pretty smoothly. Hopefully it goes smoothly when we start it up. I don't see why it wouldn't. I've got to throw this guy on, goes across here on the intercooler, and then plug in a few things down on each side, put the battery in, and we'll start her up. Because we just put a ton of stuff back together, I'm also going to do a quick smoke leak test, which I've got a little homemade tester that I think either my brother or my dad made that actually works pretty good. You just hook it up to like a vacuum port here, and it blows smoke into the system. It'll tell you if you've got a decent sized leak, and that's a good starting point in case you're battling anything like that. It's literally just a mason jar with some holes in the top, oil soaked rags in here, light them on fire, put the cap back on. One of these lines goes to the intake. The other line, you just blow a little bit of compressed air into, and it blows air into the system. Works perfectly, pretty straightforward, pretty easy. I'm probably going to go off of like this port right here. I will get some out of the intake box, but other than that, we should not have any smoke. You do not need compressed air to do this. You can just blow into one of the hoses, but it's just easier with compressed air, so that's what I'm going to do. Let that burn for a sec, and then I will show you. Just like that. Get the air hose. Blow some smoke in there. You can see some coming out of the air box. Like I said, that's totally fine. Doing it a second time here just to double check, but I do not see any leaks other than it coming out of the air box. But I do not see anything else, which is a good thing. Obviously, we do not want any leaks. Looks solid to me. We are good there. So now we know we don't have any big leaks. There's a potential that we might have some small leaks, but more than likely not. Usually when I have a leak, they're usually big leaks because I forget to put something on. Everybody does it. If you watch my last video, you know I make mistakes. Don't beat up yourself too bad about it. Professional shops make mistakes, so don't beat yourself up too much. I actually should check if I have a fuel leak. I forgot I changed fuel system stuff, so let me check that. Sounds like we don't have any leaks, but I do not smell anything or hear anything, which is usually a good indicator of if we have a leak. But let's take a look at this access port. See if we got any check engine lights, because if we have anything unplugged, that would throw a check engine light usually right away. No codes. Tune. Change ECU map. Let's see if there's like a really basic Cobb map on here. Restore Cobb OTS maps. Let's do that. I did not see that option before. ECU reflash. Okay, here we go. Stage 1, 93, boost select. That should be good. We'll just do the most basic Cobb map, which is probably technically for an intake and all that, but I'd like to just get it on there and idle it, make sure our air fuels look fine. Then we'll probably drive it around for a little bit, then we'll unmarry it, put the factory tune back on it. Should work out perfect. At least we're hoping it works out perfect. I guess let's start it and see what happens. Gonna make sure there's no leaks Sounds good though. Air fuel ratio looks pretty solid. Perfect. That's what we wanted to see. That's why I wanted this on here. I'm gonna let this idle, get it up to temp because we did have to drain coolant out of it. So get it up to temp, make sure we got the air bled out of the system, and then we'll go from there. So far everything looks good, everything sounds good. I don't see any leaks or anything, so hopefully all that air pump stuff functions correctly. We don't have to swap any of that out. It wouldn't be that big of a pain, and I have spares. But so far no check engine lights. At least I'll double check again here, which means I have everything plugged in, and so far everything's functioning properly. Yeah, so far so good. All right, we're gonna see if we can get the coolant temp up a little bit. See if we can get these fans to kick on up to 194. It should hit 207, 209 before the fans kick on, or the fans will kick on when it hits that temp. But yeah, I'm not gonna do a ton. Just gonna drive around a little bit. If everything looks good, I will put the factory map back on it and remove the access port. We've moved 30 feet. So far, so good. Hopefully you guys don't tip over on me. I got my golf clubs in the back. I probably should have taken those out. I might be clanking around. We just want to make sure we don't get any check engine lights. We want to make sure everything feels good. It feels nice and smooth so far. Air fuels look nice. 0% air fuel learning. Don't know how that's really possible, but coolant temps might actually go down because it's pretty cool out. It says it's 55 degrees right now. So the coolant temps might actually drop as we're driving, but everything feels pretty good. I'm just gonna turn around right up here. Yeah, coolant temps are going down, which is fine. We just want to make sure that when we stop, that it warms up, fans come on, cools down, and it will repeat that cycle. That just tells us that the thermostat opened, that everything's working properly, there's no air in the system. But I expect some air fuel learning because this is a Cobb off-the-shelf map, and I believe that's for like if you've got an intake and maybe a downpipe. Maybe, not really sure, but they look pretty solid, so that means we're not too far off. A little bit of boost, so sounds good, feels good. Air fuels drop as I increase the throttle, so that is ideal. That is good. Yeah, I say success as long as we don't get any check engine lights. And then I'm gonna stop. I just turned around. I'm gonna be back home in a second, and I'll stop, and we'll get we'll get the coolant temps to come up and have the fans kick on, and this project will be done aside from the few parts that I need. And then I got to do brakes on this thing, and it's getting detailed and listed for sale, and it's time for the 17 STI. I'm excited for. I'm not necessarily excited to do the work, but I'm excited for it to be running, which means I have to do the work. But that's just how everything goes. We'll park right here, watch the coolant temps come up, and make sure that's working good. So far, so good. Now that we drove it, coolant temps should slightly rise now that we're sitting here, and we'll just wait till they go up. Fans did kick on. It only hit 196. We'll see if it comes back up. We will watch the fans kick on. If they do, good. I'm going to try and get my hand down and feel this lower radiator hose to make sure that that's warm, because if this lower radiator hose down there is still cold, that means the thermostat has not opened, but it should have by now. So I'm going to see if I can fit my hand down there, confirm that, and make sure the fans come on again. The radiator hose was warm and fans kicked on again. Maybe these kick on a little bit earlier than the older ones, but it hit 196 again. It should rip down back to in the 180s somewhere, and that should be it. I would definitely say that is a success. If you guys are looking for a V8 chassis STI, this is a 2019. It has about 74,000 miles on it, and the motor has roughly 5,000 miles. I'd have to double check. Brand new Type RA short block, redone heads, new turbo, all the works that I typically do. It's dirty right now, but it's going to be detailed and cleaned. But I'm going to wrap up the 2019 STI back to stock video right here. If you guys are watching, especially if you made it all the way through, I greatly appreciate it. I hope your guys' projects are going well. I hope you're doing well in life, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.